Hello, everybody. It is Dr. Z. We are still here in European exploration and conquest. This is going to be part 2 of our discussion. So if you haven't watched part 1, go back and watch that. Part 2, we are going to talk about cultural warfare and genocide. Part 1 was more about the causes and economics behind European expansion in this time period. So I want to start with sort of a little case study. Okay. Cortez is one of the people who comes to the today what we consider the Yucatan and Mexico, and at the time was the Mexica Empire. Okay, you may know this as the Aztec Empire, and this was in Mesoamerica, Central America, right? And at its height, right, it has mythological, religious traditions, amazing architecture, amazing art. Many of you perhaps have gone, we live here in Florida, many of you have had the chance to go to Mexico and see some of the Aztec archaeological sites that are there, right? So we're familiar with the Aztecs, right? And when we think about the Aztecs, we want to think about them as a large empire that is centered around political expansion and dominance of other city-states, right? So the Aztecs themselves were looking to grow and to expand, and certainly are an empire. I don't want you to imagine the Aztecs as just, people sitting there as sitting ducks waiting to be conquered, right? Which is sort of, I think, the misconception a lot of the time that we have when we think about colonization. Their use of warfare was extraordinary, right? And they were trying to expand their influence. One of the things that fascinates me about the Aztecs is the city itself of Tenochtitlan. It was centered in the middle of a lake, and it was really sort of a feat of engineering to be able to have this amazing city. It's one of the cities that if I were to travel back in time, I would love to see Tenochtitlan at its height. The markets are incredible, and you could find, the way that they describe the markets in Tenochtitlan are very similar to accounts of markets in ancient Rome and in ancient Athens, with goods and peoples that coming from all over. You really could find anything, bustling, really lively, amazing place to visit. And the head of the Mexica Empire, okay, is Moctezuma, who you see on the right. And of course, Cortez is the Spanish conquistador you see here on the left. And the Mexicas had their weapons were obsidian. If you see, look on the right, that is a Mexica, a drawing of a Mexica warrior, right, facing off against a Spanish conquistador who had steel weapons. And I think you know where I'm going with this. The Mexica weapons were, varied, tried and true. Yet when the Europeans arrived, their weapons, their guns, their steel, the guns themselves, it wasn't so much that it's a gun, it's the noise, right? So one of these witnesses, in particular, this is a Portuguese attack, so this is different. This isn't Cortez, but it says the noise of the cannon was as the noise of thunder in the heavens, and the flashes of fire of their guns were like flashes of lightning in the sky, and the noise of their matchlocks was like that of ground nuts popping in a frying pan, right? So there's a shock effect to those weapons. The horses were shocking, right? A new animal being used, and of course, with the steel weapons as well. And then, of course, there's the factor of biological warfare, which you're probably familiar with from learning American history. This is a chronicle by a Mayan leader. The Mayans, if you'll remember, are an earlier civilization on the Yucatan Peninsula, and they are still in existence today. There are Mayan people today, and they also were in existence at this time as well. Great was the stench of the dead after our fathers and grandfathers succumbed. Half of the people fled to the fields. The dogs and vultures devoured the bodies. The mortality was terrible. Your grandfather died, and with him the sons of the king and his brothers and kinsmen. Right? So they're saying there basically that, this disease is not only going after poor people. The rich people are succumbing to it as well. So it was that we became orphans, oh my son. So we became when we were young, all of us thus we were born to die. Right. So this, European diseases were really a challenge. There's a famous book by Jared Diamond, and I know historians, some historians have take issue with it. But the logic behind some of it makes sense, right? That it was weapons, right? And biological warfare that were, a big part of what happened. Your book, actually, I encourage you to go and look at the McKay text, because they have a much more complex way of looking at it, and looking at the inner workings of the Aztec Empire and the people who wanted to see them get put down, get defeated. And so that the Spanish were working in cahoots with other locals, right, to try and bring down the Aztecs. So also an important factor to think about. This map is pretty helpful to think, to kind of focus us in this time period. So this certainly is, this era of colonization is certainly all about the Americas, not just Central America, but North and South as well. And I want you to think, I want you to see, which European countries do you think were more dominant, right? And what does the map tell you? Maps certainly tell us a lot. Here's another map. This is from the Treaty of Tordesillas, which divided the Americas between the Portuguese and the Spanish, right? So we see the line here of demarcation for the Portuguese, Brazil, right? And the rest being Spanish. And of course, we see the results of this today with the languages that are spoken Central and South America. When we think of the results of this, this part of colonization, right? Certainly genocide of indigenous people, the enslavement of Africans as well. And one of the words that the AP gods want you to understand is the Asiento. And so this is a contract between the Spanish crown, right, who would hire merchants, right, to have, merchants would then have the right to enslave Africans, to bring them to the colonies in the Spanish Americas. So Spanish ships generally didn't carry enslaved people themselves. Traders would, right, from Genoa, from Portugal, later on for the Dutch, the French, the British. And the Spanish didn't have a territorial foothold in West Africa, but the Portuguese did. So the Spanish, they used enslaved people for labor in the Americas. And different Portuguese traders, for example, would bid for the right to hold the Asiento. And that is one of the concepts that the AP gods want you to understand. The other concept regarding this time period that they want you to understand is the Middle Passage. You probably remember the Middle Passage and perhaps triangle trade from your studies of American history. And we'll talk some about this in class, and I have a few documents for you to read as well, right? But to understand, right, that the triangle of trade, right, and this map shows, where enslaved people went to in the Americas from Africa. And this is where we will end today. Okay, we will talk a lot more in class about this. I won't go on here because the documents, I think, are probably some of the better ways to consider this very challenging and difficult part of history. All right. Thank you very much. And I will see you in class.